Rolling.
Why don't you tell us who you are, Luke?
I'm Luke Gaffney with Civil Steel, and today we're going to be learning about torch cutting and welding. This is for a video if you guys just picked up your tanks and everything and you're looking to just get into it. So we're starting off the bat, and here we got our oxygen and our acetylene. We already have our regulators hooked up, but on your oxygen it's a normal thread pitch, and then on your acetylene it's a reverse. They do this so you don't get the two mixed up. So what we'll do is I've got my regulators set up with quick connects, so then it's easy for me. I can leave them on, go ahead and just plug them right in. And we are hooked up. Unravel this guy. And first things first, we're gonna get started with our torch. You're gonna go ahead and you see these are different colors. They won't plug in if they're in the wrong one. That's why I like the quick connect. Go ahead and get it set up. So now our torch is connected to our regulators, everything's set up. Our bottles and our regulators are still shut off. But before we jump into that, we're gonna make sure that we have all of our safety. You can see I got my long sleeves, I got my safety glasses, gloves, leather closed-toed shoes, boots, and some jeans. But what you'll need, you're gonna want dark shaded safety glasses. It's not gonna be like welding where you're burning your eyes. It's gonna be more so, it's just really bright and you wanna shade them. So you got some super dark ones here, not so dark, and I've just got regular sunglasses. When you're cutting or doing anything of that nature, you're gonna want something that's not gonna fade away as you start cutting or heating it up. So we like to use soapstone. Soapstone comes in a different variety of sizes. And then we also use our scribe. And so you can go ahead, use your square, make a line, and you'll see it there. It's very faint, it's hard to see, but it won't go away with heat. Go online, find yourself a chart. This is for cutting with oxyacetylene. So make sure it says acetylene and not propane or any other type of gas. And this is gonna be your material thickness, your tip chart. So each one of these tips has a different series of numbers on it that correlate to the thickness of material that you can cut with it. This is in millimeters, this is in inches, and then what to set your regulator on your oxygen to in order to cut that corresponding material. As you can see that your acetylene stays at 10 PSI. All of this is in PSI. And just briefly, acetylene is a man-made fuel. So at high PSIs, it's very unstable. And so acetylene's always operated at low PSI. Oxygen, not so much. We can run that up pretty high. That's why the bottles are two different sizes. On that chart, you can see that you'll be running up to 90 PSI of oxygen and still only 10 PSI. So you're gonna need that bigger oxygen bottle to keep up with how much like the differentiating PSIs are. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and don my safety glasses. What we're gonna do is we're gonna turn on our acetylene first, which is down here. I'm always gonna stand behind the regulator in case it were to ever explode due to back pressure, and we'll talk about that. So whenever I turn it on or open up those valves, I'm gonna keep opening it until I feel that stop. Once it's seated, the valve is all the way open. You don't, like if you were to use a welding machine, you can just crack that regulator. On this, I'm gonna open it until it's full stop. So then we can see over here, this is how much pressure is in the tank itself. So we have a full tank. And then this is how much is preset based on this T-handle. We are sitting just about at 10 right now. So it's set, that's how I left it. We're good to go. We'll go ahead and do the same thing here. We're gonna open it all the way up. until it stops. There it stopped, and so we still have a pretty full tank here, and then we're sitting at about 45 psi on the oxygen. So now with that out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and look at our cutting torch. The reason this is cutting is because it's got this plunger, it's got our oxygen adjustment, and so if it was a welding or a brazing torch, right here at this knuckle, it would switch over to the torch or the welding tip torch, making it much smaller application. But here we are able to cut. It houses our cutting head. So if we look at this here, we've got our fuel line in, our acetylene line in, that's marked on the torch handle with an F. We've got our oxygen line in, which is green, and that dons a O. And so we know that this line here is oxygen, this line here is fuel. And then moving up the torch, we have our plunger, and this controls our oxygen outflow. And then this does our micro adjustments. And so what we can do is once we hit either this back plunger, we can watch how much PSI. That needle just moves just a little bit because that's where we have it set. So this, I keep this oxygen open all the time. It's probably bad practice. You should shut it every time you're finished or start using it. So shut it off, open it up. And then our acetylene is completely closed, and we'll keep that closed. Our micro adjustment up here is off. If I were to crack it open, you can hear it, maybe you can't, but that's allowing oxygen out of the line, and we can control how much oxygen is coming out of that line by opening or closing it. This is gonna be fully open and fully off. It's not adjusting it at all. So now we've kind of got our setup as far as this torch is ready to go. We got fuel running up to this stop point here. We've got acetylene running up to this stop here. What we'll do next is go ahead and strike our striker and give ourselves a flame. So I'm gonna just very so slightly crack that fuel line, just maybe just a crack. You can hear it, you can smell it. And so now I've got acetylene coming out, just nothing else but acetylene burning off right now. We see a lot of soot in the air right now, and I can adjust that flame by either opening it higher or closing it down to a very small flame. If you notice, you see a lot of that soot there that I mentioned before. So in order to set a proper cutting flame, what I'll do is I'll start opening up that acetylene valve until I see that soot start to dissipate. So just about there. You can still kind of see the soot in the background, but it's not there as much as what some guys refer to as little parachutes. The soot's big enough that it's starting to drop back down. With this flame here, I really like this flame. I'm gonna start introducing the oxygen. Since it's open down here, we don't have to worry about it down here. The rest of the action is gonna happen right here. So with my left hand, I'm gonna go ahead and just ever so slightly introduce that oxygen. You can start to see that flame change. And what I'm really looking for is you have this long white flame right here, and that is coming out of the center of the tip of this torch. And so if we were to look at that torch tip, it's got, I want to say 6 or 8 little torch holes, which is where the acetylene's coming out. And right in the middle, we've got a very big hole, and that's where the oxygen's coming out. So you can tell the oxygen level based on that center flame. And so what I'm going to do is bring that flame, that sharp point of a flame, back until about right there. Right then, I'm going to introduce this back plunger, and it's going to disturb that sharp points that I have coming out. Once I do that, they're disturbed. I'm going to sharpen them even better to about that point right there. So now these are sharp. When I depress the plunger, they stay sharp. And so that is the flame that I'm going to go ahead and use to cut. what I did was I pre-chose a tip that corresponds with the thickness of material. I believe we got 1/4 inch right here. So with a 1/4 inch, I got a single aught tip number, a single 0 tip. So you got double aught, single aught, and then up 1, 2, and up from there. So whenever I go to cut this plate, I've already pre-laid it out with soapstone. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that all of this line is out from underneath. What I don't wanna have happen is when I cut this plate off, I don't want it to drop and cut my torch lines, and I also don't want any slag or spatter or anything like that to go ahead and puncture those lines, because what you'll have is just raw acetylene burning off into the atmosphere and or catching yourself or any surroundings on fire. In order to cut this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and preheat this plate a good bit. I'm going to go back and forth over my line that I already have. And then I'm going to settle at the front. I'm going to get myself in a good position where I can go ahead and what I did there was I got too close with the plate. I snuffed out the flame and it had no oxygen, like natural oxygen, in order to breathe, so I just killed the flame. What I'll do is turn everything off again, starting with my oxygen. I'll quickly shut that off, and then I'll quickly shut my fuel off. So what I'll do is I'll start the whole process over. I'll crack that fuel, get that flame again, turn it up until the soot is gone, introduce my oxygen, bring that flame back. There we go. Preheat that plate. Like I was saying before, I'm gonna start at this line. I'm gonna hang my flame just about half over. I'm gonna wait until it gets glowing bright orange. And you can see I bring it to that point. That's the color orange that I want to see right before I depress this back plunger and start making my cut. I press the plunger and I keep my tip about a quarter, or we'll say an 1/8 inch off the plate. And I can start to move relatively fast. And I'm making sure that if I shake it all, I shake in the direction that I'm cutting. And again, I'm keeping my legs and limbs and everything kind of clear of all this flame and sparks and smoke and everything below. Whenever this drops off, I want to make sure that there's nothing on the ground that could catch on fire. Again, we'll cut another strip. I've got a couple here that are going. I'm going to show you some things that'll happen if we do this wrong. If I go too fast or too slow. So again, I'm heating up that point. I can preheat the plate a good bit, but it's still pretty hot for my first cut. So I go ahead, hit that plunger. If I were to go too fast right now, nothing happens, right? So I come back right into the last spot I was at, get it hot, press that plunger, start moving forward. If I get too far from it, as I start moving back, that oxygen doesn't have the same amount of power to really make a good cut through. And so that's why we want to stay real nice and close to it. If you're trying to do precision cutting, what you want to make sure is that your head is upright, because now I'm adding a weird angle to it if I were to go one way or another. So I want to make sure that's straight up and down. And then make way to go through it. So with all that variation and deviation from my line, what's happened is on the underside, it's welded itself back together. It's not much, I can go ahead and push it off, but you see where I started acting funny, it welded itself back together because all of that is still molten metal that's connecting to itself. We'll go ahead and make 2 more cuts just for you to watch. And again, I'm in a comfortable position. I'm out of the way. I've given my body enough room to kind of move with my cuts. There, I went too fast. Like I said, you want to try and, if you're going to shake, you want to shake with the direction of the cut. There's a clean cut despite my moving too fast. By this point, this plate is pretty hot, so we don't really have to worry as much about preheating. One thing to be mindful of is this torch is pretty close to my body. What I want to make sure is that I don't have any of these knobs rolling on my finger where I'm adjusting them or adjusting them with my rib cage. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit away from my body. So now that we've started on one side and finished on the other with just straight lines, that's not always the case with going through the plate. A lot of the time what you want to do is you want to put a hole right in the middle of the plate, and you're not starting at one edge where you can really preheat. So what we'll go ahead and look at is how to go ahead and plunge a cut. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna heat this up. It doesn't need much heating just because of what we've been doing to this plate already. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm not gonna start right on the line I wanna cut. I'm gonna start just a little bit off. And you can now see that I'm close enough, and I start making a small circle, and we're watching as that plate gets really head. I'm gonna turn my torch just a bit, plunge through. I'm gonna walk over to the line that I intend to cut, and I'm gonna start moving on that cut. You really wanna wait until you see that color change of that plate before you depress that plunger. If you do not do that, it's gonna blow back at you, blow up into your face, and that's why we have our safety glasses on again. So that's a circle. We'll go ahead and do that again with this square, this tic-tac-toe board that I've kind of made. So I'm gonna go right in the center of it. I'm gonna start circling. I'm gonna get that real hot right in the center till I see that orange start to puddle around. It's starting to follow my torch. And I'm gonna plunge it. I'm gonna hold into that plunger. Once I hit that plunger, I'm dedicated to making that cut. You don't wanna kind of plunge it. You wanna go full bore into that cut. You can see that middle square is getting real hot. The whole thing has nowhere to kind of dissipate that heat to. It's so hot that it re-welded itself, so now I'm kind of going back over myself a little bit. So if you look at that, it is so hot that it welded itself back together with a slight hammer touch right out. And you can see it on the ground, it's still really hot. So be careful, don't step on that. That'll surely ignite your pants or anything in the surrounding area. So what you can do is kind of just push that off to the side, make sure that you're always mindful. That thing will go up for a good bit of time to come. So now, I've cut everything that I've wanted to cut. Now what do, right? We got this flame. We don't know how to turn it off. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and reverse every step that we took to get here. So starting off, we're gonna turn this knob, turn the oxygen off to the torch itself by giving us that big, nice acetylene flame. With that flame glowing, we're gonna go ahead and cut it off at our fuel valve, bring it all the way back in. We still have a little bit. This is pulling all the acetylene out of the line. A good way to shut that off is I'm gonna just hit that plunger real quick. It's gonna give it a blast of oxygen. It's gonna kill it. Now we have our torch dead, but we still have all of our pressure in our line up until these stop valves in here. So we're completely done. We're done using it. Instead of using the quick connects and popping it off, that would still keep all the pressure in the lines from our oxygen acetylene. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to our oxygen and shut that off. The reason why we shut that off is we have so much more PSI in this oxygen bottle than we do in our acetylene bottle. What we don't wanna have happen is any like blowback or this oxygen bottle overtaking our acetylene bottle, and when that happens, it can be catastrophic. The weakest point of these regulators is in these T-valves. So if you ever get that kind of back pressure buildup and one bottle overtaking another, this part of the bottle is the weakest, and they liken that to a 30-06 rifle round exploding, and this T shooting out at that kind of speed and that velocity. So that's another big reason is why we're standing back here. The weakest point is right here. So anytime adjusting these, we're gonna be off to the side. Now that these two bottles are off and they're completely closed, like I said, all the way open, all the way closed, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna relieve all that pressure in this line by one of two ways. We can crack this knob here, or we can depress the plunger here. Quick and easy for me, depress the plunger. We'll watch it first lose the pressure in the tank, and then secondly at the regulator itself. You can hear this tank is completely empty now. I hit this plunger, nothing's happening. Now we can do the same thing to the acetylene. We're gonna crack our line and watch those needles drop. Now that these two are open and everything's out of the line, we can go ahead and reclose them. Make sure they're tight, and I'm gonna go ahead and reclose this oxygen line. Now this torch is completely at a dead setting. I can go ahead and disconnect my quick connects, put the torch down. This is now where I would set up my torch. I disconnect it, put it all away for the night. Real quick, what I'll do is I'm gonna just run you through setting up your cut or your welding or your brazing tip. I don't have anything really set up for it, but I'll give you a good look at what the brazing torch tip is gonna look like when we're all set. So again, we're gonna go ahead and just run through this process. I'm not gonna talk about it much because we already did that, but I'm gonna go ahead and open these bottles the whole way up. We don't do a lot of brazing or oxyacetylene welding here in this shop, so I'm not going to be the guy that you really ask. But the internet's going to have a lot better answers. Granted, this is where this video is going. So with our previous settings, I'm going to go ahead, now that this oxygen is shut off, this fuel is shut off, I'm going to go ahead, crack the fuel again. Once again, we're starting with our fuel. Strike it. That's a really high flame. I'm gonna bring it all the way back down until I see that soot. My soot is always gonna be my starting place, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it up until that soot goes away. Soot's kind of gone. We can see it just a little bit. We don't want a crazy roaring flame, but your soot is always gonna be your holding place for where it should be. Now I'm gonna introduce my oxygen. I'm gonna refine that flame. It went out as it does. I'm not adjusting my fuel as you probably should, but I already have a setting that I like. I'm in the process of now finding that good brazing tip. Right, so I'm making micro adjustments to see that there. I like that. It's making some goofy sounds. I think probably can do this. Okay. But anyway, if I was gonna go ahead to weld, I'd kind of do the same setup. But now what I'm using is that little blue tip, and that is where I'm gonna draw my heat from. I'm gonna just use the very tip of that, like a little paintbrush. I'm gonna create a molten puddle. And at this point, whether you use a filler metal or not, I would bring that little puddle up to heat. And with a filler metal, I would have two pieces of metal that I was joining, a parent metal and two pieces of parent metal and your filler metal to create that weld, which I don't have set up for this video. To kill this, I'm gonna go ahead and go from the beginning, work it all the way back through. So I'm gonna go ahead and shut off my oxygen. I'm gonna bring that flame back down. It dies. I don't have my plunger to put it out. It's already out. I see that. I'm gonna go over to my oxygen bottle, shut that off completely. And then over to my acetylene bottle, do the same thing, shut that off completely. Now that those two are done, what I'll do is I'll open my oxygen, bring those lines down to 0. Close that off, make sure it's tight, open up my acetylene, bring those lines back down to 0, and you're set. Now I'll go ahead and use my quick connects. Now granted, a lot of people don't have quick connects for their torch setup, so what you're going to use is kind of like a toothless crescent wrench. You never want to use teeth because all this stuff's grass. With grass, you'll cut into it with those like pliers, wrenches, anything like that. So make sure it's an adjustable wrench with soft teeth, so you're not marring up all of your connection points. That being said, guys, be safe. Make sure you have all of your PPE. You're in a well-ventilated area. There's no flammables around, that being wood, that being rags, anything like that. Your most prized possessions are typically in your garage or in your workshop. So be safe, keep yourself at peace of mind when doing this kind of stuff. Have fun. This is probably one of my favorite parts of welding, is using what they call the gas axe or torch or anything like that. It's such a fun time being able to cut into anything. But I'm a professional in welding. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a professional at torch cutting. These aren't the best cuts, and I'm not saying they are. So ease up in the comment section if there becomes one. So anyway, with that being said, give us a follow on Civil Steel, or civil underscore, I don't know, steel. Visit us at civilsteelaustin.com. Check us out, guys. Have a good one.